I never imagined that the quietest day of my life would be my husband Richard's funeral. After 42 years of marriage, I stood there by his coffin when suddenly I received a terrifying message. I am alive. The person in the coffin is not me. I felt as if my whole world collapsed, but before I continue, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching from. We love knowing how far our stories reach. My name is Elizabeth Harris. I am 66 years old. What I am about to tell you changed my life forever. Some stories shatter you into 1,000 pieces, and this is mine. My husband Richard's funeral was the quietest day of my life. 42 years of marriage reduced to a single body in a coffin. I stood by the grave, my legs trembling, barely able to hold me upright, when suddenly my phone buzzed inside the pocket of the only black dress I owned. With shaking hands, I opened a message from an unknown number. The words made my blood run cold. I am alive. The person in the coffin is not me. My heart pounded wildly. Surely this had to be a cruel joke or some mistake. With trembling fingers, I texted back, "I don't understand. Where are you?" The reply came instantly, "I can't say. I am being watched." Don't trust our sons. I lifted my eyes from the screen, feeling as though my world had collapsed like a sandcastle. I saw David and Michael, my two sons, standing on the other side of the coffin, their faces far too calm. Something was wrong. Their tears looked forced, their hugs as cold as the wind sweeping across the cemetery. I remembered the very first time Richard spoke to me. It was a bright Tuesday morning in the little town of Springfield, Illinois. I was heading to the market in a faded blue dress, carrying an empty basket, planning to buy a few things for my sick mother. He stepped out of a small bicycle repair shop, his hands covered in grease, smiling shyly in a way that melted my heart. "Good morning, Elizabeth," he said softly. "Do you need me to check your bike?" I didn't even own a bike, but I made up a reason just to talk to him. That simple moment led to meetings under the old oak tree in the square, promises of eternal love, and finally a modest wedding full of hope. The early years were very hard. We lived in a 2-room house with a roof that leaked whenever it rained. Richard worked from dawn until night in the repair shop, while I sewed for women in the neighborhood. When David was born, I was overjoyed beyond belief. A perfect baby boy with his father's big eyes. 2 years later, Michael arrived, just as beautiful. I raised them with all the love I had, sacrificing everything for them. Richard was a wonderful father. He often took them fishing at the lake on Sundays, taught them to fix things with their hands, and told bedtime stories. We were a close family, or at least I thought so. But over the years, things began to change. David, the eldest, was always ambitious. Even as a boy, he wondered why we lived so poor, why we didn't own a car like other families. Michael followed closely behind his brother. When David turned 18, Richard suggested he work at the shop, but he flatly refused. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you. I will become someone important." Those words cut Richard deeply. Many nights I found him sitting on the porch under the stars, hiding his sorrow from me. That son of ours didn't just reject his father's work, he rejected his father's way of life. Years later, David made a name for himself in Chicago real estate. Michael soon followed him. Both started making more money than Richard and I had ever dreamed of. At first, I was proud. Our sons had escaped poverty, but the joy slowly turned to sadness. Their visits became fewer, their calls shorter. When they did come, they drove luxury cars, wore expensive suits, and spoke only of investments and real estate. They looked at our little house with a mixture of pity and shame. "Mom," David said once, "you and Dad should move somewhere better. This house is falling apart." He was right, but this house held all our memories. It was where we raised our children, shared thousands of meals, and grew old together. Not fancy, but it was home. Richard, with his quiet wisdom, would often tell me, "Elizabeth, money has changed them. We are no longer enough for them." I didn't want to believe it. I kept making excuses for their absence, their rushed calls, their broken promises. They were just busy building their lives, I told myself. One day they would return to being the sweet boys we had raised. But deep down, I knew Richard was right. We had lost our sons long before I lost my husband. I just never imagined they would become such strangers. The clearest change began when David married Jennifer Collins, a city woman who always looked down on our simple life. The first time David brought her over, she stepped out of the car in high heels that sank into the dirt outside our porch, wearing a red dress likely worth more than all the clothes I had ever owned. "Nice to meet you," she said with a forced smile, offering only her fingertips. Her eyes swept over our small home with such disdain that I felt smaller than ever. At dinner, she barely touched the food, though I had cooked with all my heart. David kept apologizing for things he had never been ashamed of before. "Next time we'll take them to a restaurant," he whispered to Jennifer, thinking I couldn't hear. But I heard every word, each one cutting into me like a knife. Michael remained single, but his distance matched his brother's. He only came on special occasions, always in a hurry to leave, eyes glued to his phone discussing business. Sunday gatherings became nothing but a memory. Christmases turned cold and awkward. They brought expensive gifts we didn't need. They stayed only a few hours before leaving, relieved. Richard and I grew. Old in loneliness, finding comfort only in each other. He still worked in the shop, though his hands had grown weak. I still sewed, though my eyesight had dimmed. We lived on a modest pension, proud that we never asked our successful sons for help. "Do you know what the saddest part is, Elizabeth?" Richard asked one night as we drank coffee on the porch. "Not that they have money, but that money makes them think we no longer matter." Things worsened when David bought a $200,000 house in a wealthy Chicago neighborhood. Michael followed, investing in a $150,000 luxury condo. Suddenly they owned things we never dared to dream of. "You should sell this house and move into a senior community," Jennifer suggested one visit. "There are beautiful places for older people." The word community stung like a slap. After 40 years of building a home, they wanted to push us into a retirement facility. "We don't need a retirement home," Richard answered with dignity. "We are fine here." But I saw it in David and Michael's eyes, they agreed with Jennifer. To them we were just a burden, a problem to be solved. Then the blunt suggestions began. One day David arrived with a stack of papers, prepared without even asking us. "Dad, Mom," he said with a rehearsed smile, "I've been thinking about your future. This house is worth maybe $1,000 at best. If we sell it, I can add money so you can move somewhere better." To us, no place could be better than the home that had held our happiness for decades. But David didn't understand. In his eyes, everything was about money. He continued, "I think Dad should retire. You're 70 now. It's time to rest." Richard looked at him with infinite sorrow. "Son, work is not a burden to me. It keeps me alive, gives me a reason to go on." "But you could get hurt," Michael interrupted. "At your age, an accident could be dangerous." His words sounded concerned, but I felt the impatience beneath them, a pressure I couldn't quite name. The following months were full of tension. Our sons kept pushing us to sell the house. They brought real estate agents without notice. They set prices without asking. At one heavy dinner, David said, "Jennifer and I plan to have a baby soon. We'll need more money. If you sell the house and move into something smaller, that money could be your inheritance in advance." Inheritance while we were still alive. He was demanding our assets while we were still here. I was stunned by the audacity. Richard stayed calm, though I saw his jaw tighten. "Son, when your mother and I are gone, everything will be yours. But while we are alive, the decisions are ours." "Stop being stubborn," Michael snapped, in a harsh tone I had never heard from him. "You're old. You can't live in the past forever." That night, after they left, Richard and I stayed up talking. For the first time in our marriage, we admitted that maybe our children were no longer the people we had raised. "Something is wrong, Elizabeth," he said, with a fear in his eyes I had never seen before. "This isn't just ambition or impatience. There is something darker behind this pressure." I didn't know then just how right he was. The last normal conversation I had with David was 3 weeks before Richard's death. He came alone, without his wife, looking more serious than ever. "Mom," he said, sitting at the kitchen table where he had eaten countless breakfasts as a child, "I just want you to know that no matter what happens, Michael and I will always take care of you." At the time, those words comforted me, but now, standing at Richard's grave, they chilled me. Why had he said, "no matter what happens"? What did he know that I didn't? The accident that changed everything happened on a Tuesday morning. Richard had gone to the shop early, as he had done for more than 40 years. I was in the kitchen preparing his favorite lunch when the phone rang with a sense of urgency that made me shiver. "Mrs. Harris," a strange voice asked. "I'm calling from Memorial Hospital. Your husband has been in a serious accident. You must come immediately." The words blurred together in my mind. My whole world seemed to stop. My legs went weak, and I had to hold onto the doorway to keep from falling. My neighbor Helen drove me to the hospital because I was trembling too much to hold the car keys. On the way, my mind refused to accept what was happening. Richard was always careful, meticulous in his work. How could this be? When we arrived, David and Michael were already there. That surprised me since no one had called them, at least not me, but in my desperation I didn't think about it. "Mom," David said as he hugged me. "Dad is in critical condition," the doctor said. One of the machines at the shop exploded. "He has severe burns and a major head injury." Michael's eyes were red, but there was something strange in his face. He looked more anxious than sad, like someone waiting for important news rather than grieving for his father. When I entered the intensive care unit, my heart sank. Richard lay there connected to dozens of machines, his face and arms wrapped in bandages. I could hardly recognize him. His breathing was labored, sustained only by the machines beeping steadily. I went to his bedside and held his hand, the only part left untouched. "Richard, my love, I'm here. Everything will be okay. You'll recover like you always do." For a moment, I felt his hand squeeze mine lightly. His eyes moved under the lids. He was fighting. My warrior was still trying to come back to me. The next 3 days were the longest of my life. I practically lived at the hospital, sleeping on the hard chairs in the waiting room. David and Michael took turns staying with me, but they seemed more focused on talking to the doctors than comforting. Their father. I overheard fragments of conversations I didn't yet understand. Michael asked about health insurance, about treatment costs. David made phone calls about the life insurance policy and the beneficiary. "Mom," David said on the second day, "we checked Dad's insurance. He has a $50,000 policy. There's also a workplace accident policy that could pay up to $5,000. Why was he talking about money when Richard was still fighting for his life? Why was he more concerned about insurance than about his father recovering? "I don't care about the money," I snapped. "I just want your father to live." "Of course, Mom," he said, but I saw the coldness in his eyes, as if he were calculating while his father lay dying. By the third day, the doctor gave me the worst news of my life. Dr. Harris led us into a small room. "Mrs. Harris, your husband's condition is very critical. The burns have become infected, and the brain injury is more severe than we thought. We must be realistic about his chances." "What do you mean?" I asked, though my heart already knew the answer. "It means we must prepare for the worst. Your husband is in a medically induced coma. We can keep him alive indefinitely, but the chances of him waking up are almost zero." My whole world collapsed. 42 years of marriage, a life built together, and now they told me it was all turning to smoke. "We want to try everything," I said through sobs. "No matter the cost, no matter how long it takes." But David exchanged a glance with Michael that made me shiver. "Mom," David said, trying to sound compassionate, "we have to be realistic. Dad wouldn't want to live like this. He always said he didn't want to be a burden on anyone." "A burden?" I exploded with a rage I had never known. "He is your father, not a burden. He raised you, worked his whole life to give you the best he could." "We know, Mom," Michael cut in. "But we also have to think about you. The medical bills will be enormous. They could drain all your savings. Money again. Always money. My husband was dying, and they were calculating costs." That night, alone in the hospital room, I held Richard's hand and spoke as if he could hear me. "My love, I don't know what to do. The doctors say there's no hope, but I can't let you go. I can't imagine life without you." Then something happened that still chills me when I remember it. His finger twitched, lightly squeezing my hand. His lips moved as if trying to say something, though no sound came. I panicked and called the nurse. "He's responding. He's trying to speak." But by the time they came, Richard had gone back to his previous state. The nurse checked the monitors and shook her head. "Sometimes there are involuntary muscle spasms, ma'am. It doesn't mean he's conscious." But I knew what I felt. Richard had tried to reach me. He had been fighting to tell me something important. 2 days later, early in the morning, the machines blared alarms, lights flashing as nurses rushed into Richard's room. I had been dozing in the hallway, and the noise jolted me awake. "No, no," I screamed. I ran into the room as doctors worked for 40 minutes trying to save him, but it was useless. At 4:37 a.m., Richard was officially pronounced dead. The pain I felt was as if someone had ripped my heart out of my chest. I collapsed by the bed, holding his still warm body, refusing to accept he was gone forever. David and Michael arrived at the hospital an hour after their father's death. They seemed prepared, as if waiting for the call. They carried papers, documents, and phone numbers for funeral homes. "We spoke with a funeral home in Springfield," David said while I was still sobbing. "They can collect the body this morning, right?" Michael added. "We also contacted the insurance company. The claim process has already begun." How could they be so efficient, so organized, so cold barely an hour after losing their father? Something was wrong, but the grief clouded my mind. The funeral was scheduled for the following Monday. David handled everything without really asking me. He chose the simplest coffin, the shortest ceremony, as if he wanted to get it over with as quickly as possible. "That's what Dad would have wanted," he said when I protested being excluded from decisions. "Something simple, not showy." But Richard deserved more than a rushed burial and quick forgetting. The day of the funeral came, the sky dark and cold, as if even heaven mourned Richard. I wore the only black dress I had, the same one I wore at my mother's funeral. My hands shook so badly, Helen had to help button the small clasps on the back. "Be strong, Elizabeth," my friend whispered as she brushed my hair. "Richard would want to see you strong." But I didn't feel strong. I felt empty, like a hollow shell. 42 years of marriage couldn't be buried so easily. Everything in the house reminded me of him: the coffee cup on the table, the tools on the porch, the pillow still carrying his scent. When we arrived at the cemetery, I was surprised by how few people were there. I had expected many of Richard's co-workers, neighbors, familiar faces, but only David, Michael, Jennifer, Helen, the pastor, and I were present. "Where are the men from the shop?" I asked David. "We didn't want to bother anyone," he answered quickly. Dad was a private man. He would have preferred something quiet. But that wasn't true. Richard loved his community. He cared about his neighbors. He would have wanted them there to say goodbye. Why had David made everything so secretive, so rushed? Throughout the service, I watched my children with a strange detachment. David kept a solemn face appropriate for the occasion, but his eyes flicked to his watch repeatedly. Michael fidgeted as if he had somewhere more important to be. Jennifer secretly checked her phone behind her black veil. That was how they said goodbye to their father, with impatience and distraction. When it came time to throw earth onto the coffin, my legs gave out. Helen had to hold me up as I sobbed uncontrollably. The sound of dirt hitting wood echoed final, hopeless. And right then, standing by the grave, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "I am alive. The person in the coffin is not me." My heart nearly stopped. The words danced before my eyes like an illusion. Was I losing my mind from grief? With trembling hands, I replied, "Who are you?" The response came immediately. "I can't say. I am being watched. Don't trust our sons." My phone slipped from my hands as if it were burning hot. Helen bent to pick it up, but I stopped her quickly. I couldn't let anyone else see those messages, not until I understood what was happening. "Are you all right, Mom?" David asked, approaching with a look of concern. I searched his face for clues. His eyes seemed sincere, but now every gesture, every word, every expression felt suspicious. "I'm fine," I lied, slipping the phone into my purse. "I just need to go home." On the way back, I couldn't stop thinking about those messages. Could someone be playing a cruel joke at the worst moment of my life, or was Richard truly still alive? But if he was, then who had we buried? That night, alone in a house that now felt like a tomb, I went over every detail of the past few days. Richard's accident had been strange from the start. According to David, a machine at the shop had exploded, but Richard knew every bolt in that place. He was meticulous about maintenance, obsessive about safety. And how had my sons gotten to the hospital so quickly if no one had called them? The hospital called me first. I was the emergency contact. How did they know before I did? And then there was the money. From the very first day, David and Michael talked about insurance, about beneficiaries, as if they had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it. I decided to go through Richard's papers. In his old wooden desk, he kept all the important documents in a metal box. I found the $50,000 life insurance policy David had mentioned, but something struck me. The policy had been updated only 6 months earlier, raising the coverage from $5,000 to $50,000. Why had Richard increased it? He had never mentioned it to me. And more importantly, who had suggested it? I kept searching and found something even more troubling, a workplace accident policy I had never heard of, purchased only 2 months before his death, worth $5,000 if he died from a work accident. A fortune for our modest family, but tempting enough for someone without a conscience. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. Check the bank account. See who has been taking money. This time I didn't hesitate. Whoever this person was, they knew too much to be just a prankster. They knew about the insurance. They knew about my sons. They knew details only someone very close to us could know. The next day I went to the bank where Richard and I had held an account for 30 years. Mrs. Johnson, the manager who had known us for years, greeted me with sincere sympathy. "Elizabeth, I'm so sorry about Richard. He was a good man." "Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. I've come to review our accounts. I need to understand my financial situation." She showed me the statements for the last 6 months. What I saw made me freeze. In the past 3 months, there had been large withdrawals from our savings account. January, $3,000. February, $4,000. March, money I had no idea had been taken. "Who authorized these withdrawals?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Your husband came in personally," Mrs. Johnson explained. "He said he needed the money for repairs at the shop, but I handled the household finances. I knew exactly how much we had and what we spent it on. Richard had never mentioned any costly repairs at the shop. "May I see the signatures on those withdrawal slips?" I asked. She handed them to me. They did look like Richard's, but the handwriting seemed off. Too shaky, too uncertain compared to his normally firm, clear signature. "Mrs. Johnson," I asked, my heart pounding. "Did he come alone or was someone with him?" She thought for a moment. "Now that you mention it, I recall once or twice he came with one of his sons. I believe it was David. He said he was helping his father with the paperwork since Richard struggled to read without his glasses. David, my son, had been involved in withdrawals I knew nothing about, using his father's tired eyes as an excuse. But Richard could see perfectly well with his glasses, which he never took off during the day. That afternoon, as I sat staring at the withdrawal slips again and again, another message arrived. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Richard he needed more protection for you. It was a trap. I could no longer deny the mounting evidence. The mysteriously increased insurance, the unexplained withdrawals, David's presence in transactions I knew nothing about, their suspicious efficiency with the funeral, their coldness as their father lay dying. But the question that terrified me was this: if they had truly planned Richard's death, how had they done it, and who was sending me these messages? The following days became a nightmare of doubt and suspicion. Every smile from David, every hug from Michael, every word of condolence felt like a mask hiding something sinister. But I needed more proof before I could accept such a horrifying truth. My phone kept receiving messages from the unknown number. "Go to Richard's shop, check his desk. There are things you haven't seen." I decided to go there for the crest. First time since the accident. David had said a machine exploded, but when I arrived, the scene was nothing like I imagined. The shop was strangely clean, too clean for an explosion to have ever happened. No scorch marks on the walls, no debris, no sign of the destruction such a blast would have caused. "Where's the machine that exploded?" I muttered aloud, looking around. Every piece of equipment was in its place, working perfectly. The welder, the compressor, the power saw all intact. Then what had caused the accident? On Richard's desk, I found something that made my blood run cold. A note in his handwriting, dated 3 days before his death. "David keeps insisting I need more insurance. He says it's to protect Elizabeth, but something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions." Beneath it was another slip of paper. Michael brought me documents to sign. He said it was to modernize the shop, but I don't understand them. Why the rush? My husband had suspected. He had sensed our son's ill intentions, but he died before he could tell me. I kept searching and found a sealed envelope with my name on it. I opened it with trembling hands. It was a letter from Richard. My dear Elizabeth, if you are reading this letter, it means something has happened to me. Over the past months, I've noticed strange changes in David and Michael. They are focused on money, insurance, selling the house. Jennifer was putting heavy pressure on them. Yesterday, David told me I should worry about my own safety because at my age, any accident could be fatal. I don't know why, but his words sounded like a threat. I love you, Elizabeth. If something happens to me, don't blindly trust anyone, not even the children. The letter slipped from my hands. Richard had sensed his own death coming. He had seen the signs that I, blinded by maternal love, had ignored. That night, David came to visit me. He brought a bottle of liquor, and a smile so forced it looked grotesque. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about your future," he said, pouring himself a drink without asking if I wanted one. "The insurance has gone through. It'll be $125,000. How do you know the exact amount?" I asked, feigning innocence. "Oh, I helped Dad with the paperwork. He wanted to be sure you'd have enough to live comfortably." A lie. Richard had never wanted to increase the insurance. According to his own notes, it was David who pushed him. "So what do you think I should do with that money?" I asked, watching his reaction. His eyes lit up, sending a chill through me. "You could buy a smaller, cozier house. Or better yet, move into a retirement community where you'd have friends and medical care. Michael and I could manage the money for you, make it grow." "Manage my money?" The audacity. "We just want to take care of you, Mom. At your age, it's easy to get scammed, easy to make bad financial decisions. We know about investments, about business. We could triple that money in just a few years." "Let me think about it," I said, stalling. "Of course," he replied with syrupy sweetness. "But don't take too long for your own good." After he left, I sat in the kitchen trembling with rage and fear. My own children had not only killed their father, but now they were planning to rob me of everything I had left. That night, my phone buzzed with a message longer than the others. "Elizabeth, my name is Stephen Carter, private investigator. Richard hired me 3 weeks before his death because he suspected David and Michael. They poisoned him with methanol mixed into his morning coffee. I have recorded proof of their conversations, their entire plan. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., meet me at the cafe on the corner. Sit at the last table. I'll be there." At last I knew who had been sending me the messages, and more importantly, I would have proof to demand justice for Richard's death. But I also understood time was running out. David and Michael had revealed their intentions. If I didn't act quickly, I'd be locked away in a retirement home while they squandered money bought with Richard's life. The battle had begun, and though I was just a 66-year-old woman against 2 ruthless men, I had something they didn't: the truth. And truth, sooner or later, always finds a way to surface. The next day arrived with tension and dread. I dressed carefully, choosing my darkest purple dress. At 2:30 p.m., I walked toward the cafe, each step both steady and cautious. Every passerby looked suspicious. Every face on the street could have been one of my son's spies. The cafe was moderately full. I went straight to the last table as instructed. I ordered a cup of chamomile tea, sitting with trembling hands resting on the old wooden table. Exactly. At 3 p.m., a man in his 50s approached my table. He was tall, with graying hair, bright eyes, and a serious yet kind face. He carried a brown folder under his arm. "Mrs. Harris?" he asked softly. I nodded, hardly trusting my own voice. "I'm Stephen Carter. I'm very sorry for your loss. Richard was a good man." He sat down and placed the folder on the table. "Before I show you what I have, you need to know that what you're about to hear and see will be very painful. Are you ready?" "I've been ready since I got the first message," I answered with a resolve that surprised even me. Stephen opened the folder and took out a small recorder. A month earlier, Richard had come to see me. He was worried about his son's behavior. He hired me to investigate them discreetly. Stephen pressed play. Richard's voice, familiar and dear, filled the small space between us. "Stephen, you need to know that if anything happens to me, it will not be an accident. David and Michael forced me to increase my life insurance. Yesterday, David brought papers. He said it was to better protect Elizabeth. But when I read carefully, I saw clauses that directly benefit them." My heart pounded. Hearing Richard's voice was like having him back for a moment. But his words confirmed my worst fears. The recording continued. "Michael has been asking strange questions about my daily routine. How do I eat breakfast? What time do I leave the house if Elizabeth comes to the shop with me? He says he's worried about me, but the way he asks unsettles me." Stephen paused. "That was 3 weeks before he died. But I have something more recent." He played another recording, this time David's voice on the phone. "No, we can't wait any longer. The old man is getting suspicious. Yesterday he asked why I cared so much about the insurance. Yeah, I've got the methanol. It's perfect because the symptoms look just like a heart attack or stroke. No, Mom won't be a problem. After Dad dies, she'll be so grief-stricken we can do whatever we want." Tears streamed down my face. That was my son's voice, my own child, coldly plotting his father's murder. "There's more," Stephen said quietly. "This one is from the day before Richard died." Another recording played. This time it was Michael speaking to someone. "Everything's ready. Tomorrow David will put the methanol in Dad's coffee. We'll say it's some special supplement the doctor recommended. The old fool will drink it without suspicion. The symptoms will start with dizziness, confusion, then loss of vision, seizures, coma. The doctors will think it's a stroke or heart attack. By the time they realize it's poisoning, it'll be too late." My world collapsed. Not only had they planned it, but they had carried it out with chilling coldness. How could my children, the babies I once cradled through nightmares, do something so monstrous? "How did you get these recordings?" I asked through sobs. "Richard asked me to plant listening devices in the house," Stephen explained. He was afraid, though he wasn't sure of what. He pulled out a series of photos from the folder. And this David buying methanol at a store 30 minutes from town. He paid cash and used a fake name, but I caught it on video. The photos clearly showed David walking out of the store with a small bottle in his hand. The date was 5 days before Richard died. "And here," Stephen continued, handing over more documents, "financial records of David and Michael over the past 6 months. They've been spending far more than their income can justify. David owes a loan shark in Chicago $70,000. Michael has $40,000 in gambling debt. Everything became clear. It wasn't just greed, but financial desperation that drove them to kill Richard." "Why didn't you go to the police right after Richard's death?" I asked. "Because David and Michael were too cunning. They bribed Richard's attending doctor to change the official diagnosis. Instead of poisoning, the death certificate lists heart failure from work-related complications. Without medical evidence, the recordings alone weren't enough. But now we have everything," I answered, both broken and determined. Exactly, Stephen nodded. And there's one more thing you need to know. My blood froze. What is it? Your sons also plan to kill you. Stephen played the final recording with both David's and Michael's voices. After we get Dad's insurance money, we have to get rid of Mom, David said. We can't risk her suspecting or someone putting ideas in her head. How? Michael asked. Same as with Dad, but this time we'll stage it as a suicide from depression. A widow who couldn't live without her husband, no one will question it, and with the money we'll be the only heirs. Everything will be ours. The house, the savings, the insurance, nearly $200,000. The recording stopped. I shook, uncontrollably. My sons had not only killed their father but also planned to kill me, all for money. Mrs. Harris, Stephen said gently, I know this devastates you, but we have enough evidence to make them pay. What do we do now? I asked, wiping my tears. First, we go to the police with all of it. Sergeant Miller is honest, not corrupt. Second, we must act fast. Your sons are filing to have you declared mentally incompetent tomorrow morning. How do you know? I intercepted a call this morning. They're meeting Judge Johnson at 10 a.m. to start the process. I stood up, a new determination rising in me. Then we must act tonight. That evening, Stephen and I went straight to the police station. Sergeant Miller was on the night shift, perfect timing. When we arrived, I handed over all the evidence. The recordings, photos of David buying methanol, bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals, medical results proving Richard was healthy, and finally the conversations where my sons confessed to killing their father and plotting to kill their mother. The sergeant listened to every recording, his face growing darker with each word. Monstrous, he muttered. Are you sure you want to proceed? Once we arrest them, there's no turning back. Sergeant, I answered with all the dignity I had left. They killed my husband for money. They planned to kill me. They are no longer my sons. They are criminals who must face justice. 3 months later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed. Reporters from regional newspapers came to cover the case of the murderous sons. The evidence was undeniable. The recordings did not lie. The bank records did not lie. The forensic examiners found methanol in Richard's body after exhumation that did not lie either. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand on trembling legs but with a clear mind. Mrs. Harris, the prosecutor asked, can you tell us what your relationship with your sons was like before your husband was killed? I used to believe we had a good relationship, I answered, staring directly at David and Michael. I raised them with love, sacrificed everything for them. Their father worked day and night to give them the best he could. I never thought love and sacrifice would become the reason for his death. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours. When they returned, the courtroom was so silent I could hear my own heartbeat as the judge read the verdict. In the case of the state versus David Harris and Michael Harris for first-degree murder of Richard Harris, we find the defendants guilty. David collapsed into his chair. Michael sat frozen, his eyes vacant. For the charge of conspiracy to murder Elizabeth Harris, we find the defendants guilty. The judge sentenced them immediately. David Harris and Michael Harris, for the deliberate murder of your father and conspiracy to murder your mother, this court sentences you to life in prison without parole for 30 years. As I heard those words, I felt an enormous weight lift from my shoulders. Justice. At last, Richard had justice. Today, 2 years after the trial, I live peacefully in a small house. I turned Richard's workshop into a flower garden, and every Sunday I bring fresh flowers to his grave. Stephen has become a close friend, often stopping by to make sure I'm doing well. Sometimes neighbors ask if I miss my sons. The answer is complicated. I miss the children they once were, but they died long ago. Before Richard, the men they became are no longer my sons. They are strangers who share my blood but not my heart. I've learned that real family is not defined by blood but by love, loyalty, and respect. Richard was my true family for 42 years. The friends who stood beside me during the trial are my family now. Justice did not bring Richard back, but it gave me peace. And in the quiet nights, when I sit on the porch, where we used to drink coffee, I swear I can still feel him there, proud that I was strong enough to do what was right, even if it meant losing my children forever. 5 years after that harrowing day at the cemetery, I founded the Richard Harris Foundation for Victims of Family Crimes, using the insurance money to help those who have endured similar tragedies. No amount of money can bring my husband back, but every person we've helped is a small victory against the darkness that almost consumed me. As I told a young woman who came for help last week, family is never an excuse for crime. Love with boundaries is the only real love, and it is never too late to seek justice, no matter who the criminal is. Some wounds never fully heal, especially when they come from those we once called family. But I've learned that true love isn't about shared blood, it's about respect, loyalty, and how we choose to treat one another every day. Richard may be gone, but the legacy he left me is not money, it's the strength to stand up for justice and preserve my dignity. Looking back, I see that sometimes the greatest loss teaches the most important lesson, that no one has the right to take away our dignity or our inner peace, not even our own kin. Family doesn't always mean safety, but true love, whether it comes from friends, neighbors, or those who walk with us through our darkest days, is the real home. I share this story not just to speak of my pain, but to remind you that any one of us can find the strength to rise, even when everything seems shattered. And what about you? What does family mean to you, and where do you draw the line between love and forgiveness? Leave your thoughts, because every story, every perspective might be the encouragement someone lost needs to hear. And if you'd like to walk with me on this journey of sharing stories of love, loss, and resilience, stay with us so you don't miss what comes next, because who knows, tomorrow's lesson might be exactly what we need to be stronger today.